Semitic Magic, Its Origin and Development by R. Campbell Thompson. Ambaros was the only man who promised to do it on condition that he and his family should have the priesthood for life. He disguised his daughter and hid her in a sanctuary and dressed a goat in a garment and sacrificed his daughter. So, a very smart man. Among the Malays, if a spirit craves a human victim, a chicken may be substituted. Finally, we may turn to a curious instance of sacrificial substitute. Well, a cock, so a rooster. Closely allied to this, it is related in the royal annals of Sennacherib that when the king went down to the Persian Gulf, he offered gifts to Ea, the Lord of the Sea. Before them, at the side of the gulf, I stood and offered up pure victims unto Ea, the king of the deep, the golden ships, a golden fish, a golden into the depths of the sea I cast, and then I sent my ships across speedily against the city of Nagita. The offering of the golden ship is intended to propitiate Ea and satisfy the anger of the sea for ships, thus paying the toll beforehand, that the real ships may proceed on their way in safety. And of course, I don't think there's any indication other than the fact that they would worry, oh, it's going to be sunk. That may have, if anything, factored in at all. In the Golden Bough, Volume 2, Xerxes gives another royal parallel. After flogging the Hellespont, offers sacrifice on the bridge and cast into the waters the golden bull, which he had used in libation, with a golden crater and a Persian sword. Even at this day, at Gaza, they have a custom of throwing bread into the sea as an offering or vow to its inhabitants, and the victims immolated to Suleiman ibn Dawood, the wali of the two hot springs out of the Dead Sea, are sacrificed in such a manner that the blood goes into the water. Among the Maronites, the neck of the sheep is laid on the prow of a ship, and the throat is so cut that the blood runs into the sea. The victim is then thrown into the bay as a sacrifice to St. George or Saeed. And Brager gives what is probably the true. As a further comment. For these instances, it seems that the origin of the substitution has been forgotten by those that practice it. The reason for doing it are so many and various that it is obvious that they are only attempts at an explanation for continuing the practice of an old custom among the conservative people. In the instance of Abraham, the ram is a burnt sacrifice to God. In the numbers theory, the firstborn belongs to Yahweh in memory of the Passover. Arab sacrifices for the safe return of the pilgrim are a thank offering, which may be referred to many causes. The redemption of the buildings is clearly a substitution or atonement to avert evil, just as the sickness devil is given the atonement of a sheep. The Aqiqah ceremony is an act of dedication, according to Robertson Smith. We have therefore to decide on the balance of probabilities, and the question debated as the origin of such a custom are 3 in number. Now, the Akita ceremony seems to, certain aspects of it are Jewish. But that may not be Jewish too, because the Israelites picked up circumcision from, it turns out that it seems that they may not have had circumcision under Moses and such, but they picked it up from, well, the Egyptians practiced it, the Canaanites, as people are going to call them, there were people who practiced it, but there was a separate people amongst them that didn't practice it, and these were the original Israelites. But George Fraser in this Golden Bough number 249 talks about an origin of the Passover, but palatal, that's not the Little Heat Festival, or Kunwer, the Great Heat Festival, is likely the origin of the Passover ceremony, in my opinion. The Great Heat would be in August, and the Little Heat would be a month before, in July. Because there'd be a summer solstice ceremony, there'd be a Little Heat Festival and a Great Heat Festival. And the Great Heat Festival, conspicuously, was when the temperature was actually starting to drop, because in early August, late July is the hottest time of year. Well, on average, right? The possibilities are that the sacrifice of the firstborn is due to some theory similar to that of the ordinary atonement for taboo, that future danger, taboo, sickness, and sin can be removed by such a sacrifice, either from parents or the community, or an idea that the divine propriety right is so strongly insisted on that, particularly in the Hebrew laws, is due to the right of the entities to have in connection with the women of the tribe who thus bear semi-divine children, or the idea that such a sacrifice of children was in primitive times as much a sharing of a meal with the entity as other sacrifices which trace to its logical conclusion, which of the primitive Semitic savage to be a cannibal. Well, okay, and let me further explain about the Passover. So the bitter herbs, the hottest time of the year when pretty much everything left is bitter or dry, where the sacred meal was a food that you cook on the hot rocks instead of an oven. So consider that, and consider, rather than the Great Heat, in this age of Aquarius, the Great Heat Festival would be under Cancer, but move it over a couple times, maybe even a couple more times, well, let's just say just move it over twice, and, well, that puts it under the age of, that puts it under Gemini, which is really not, wait, no, I mean, that puts it under Taurus, and a bull's quite the animal to eat, right? Or you put it in age before that, which could be the origin even further, which, sheep. So 3 ages ago, which tend to be the origins of a lot of things, because the age of Taurus was the origin of a lot of Egyptian mythology. And anyways, I'm going off on a tangent. To discover the meaning of such a peculiar custom, it is plain that we must go back to the very depths of savagery. The fact that the Hebrews, at an early period, were divided between at least two divergent hypotheses for the origin of the custom of various dedications, probably neither of them correct, shows how old the real reason for such substitution may be. And if we go further and push this limit beyond the period when there was some more logical reason for the custom than the glorification of the piety of a tribal hero, or the discomfiture of an ancient enemy, we are then only reaching back to the fringe of savagery. Calling everybody savage, that's kind of not cool. This is presumably a time when he's learning that a human being is of a higher economic, social, and rational value than that of an animal. Well, humans are a type of animal, so I'm okay admitting that. And that animal life is not on the same plane as human and religious affairs. I mean, we are different, just like other species consider themselves apart. He therefore ceases to sacrifice his children as a regular custom, and substitutes beasts from the flocks in their place. Yet, although he forsakes the actual methods of his ancestors, he doubtless allows make-believe to enter somewhat into the procedure. By an ingenious display of blood, he cozened his entity into believing that the highest form of meat has been provided for the feast. For those who worship the males and the females, the Shayateen Min al Jinn, I don't think that they're going to be tricked by this pretend. But I'm not going to say that people interacting with them are required to kill humans or anything like that either. And that goes with people who cut themselves. I don't think that that's actually required. There's a lot of talk about the accidental blood and stuff like that that doesn't require. But, your chosen spiritual relationship. If we once admit that the offering was a sacrifice of the firstborn to the entities, such as reappeared at the sporadic intervals in later civilized communities in a time of stress, and a lamb or kid might take the place of a human being in a sacrificial meal, it is difficult to find any other explanation save that the origin is to be sought in a cannibal feast to which the entities were invited. The story of Abraham, although probably affording little clue to the actual origin, at least points to a sacrifice of a form similar to a sacrificial meal. What is more, in the cases in which a human being is in question, there is no idea of it being carried out in any other way except that of a bloody sacrifice by knife or fire. The redemption of the donkey goes far to confirm this. Word burp there. If the donkey was redeemed, the throat was not to be cut, but its neck was to be broken. In the primitive sacrifice, or where the offering represents the communal meal, the throat of the beast is cut, and the blood poured out. Why then should the donkey be different? Fraser concludes that a distinction was drawn between sheep, oxen, and goats on one hand, and men and donkeys on the other, and he explains that because the Israelites did not eat the donkey themselves, they concluded probably that their God did not do so either. And the price of the redemption was a lamb, which was burnt as a vicarious sacrifice instead of the donkey, on the hypothesis apparently that the roast lamb is likely to be more palatable to the Supreme Being than the roast donkey. Robertson Smith seems to have found the same difficulty about the donkey, that some form of taboo lies also at the bottom of the sacrifice of the firstlings, appearing from the provision of the older Hebrew law that if a firstling donkey is not redeemed by its owner, its neck shall be broken. Now, let me do a sideway. A lot of Muslimin believe that donkeys and horses are not to be eaten, not because they were told that donkeys or horses weren't to be eaten, but at one point they were told, break your pots, and in a way that's not required for an unclean beast that licks the pot or is cooked in a pot, thus indicating it's something else going on, and, get back to the battle. They weren't supposed to do what they did at that time, and that was sort of as a penalty. It had nothing to do with the thing being not forbidden. You're not going to find, you're not going to find guidance in the Quran about it. And aside from that one incident, nobody's going to find there's not anything about not eating any other animal, I don't think. 5 things that they don't eat. That's it. Now, I agree, perhaps horse and donkey aren't the best meat, but let's be real about the origins here. I would offer the following explanation. The reason for sacrificing kids or lambs, the goat, is that they are to be eaten, and the blood is therefore poured out on the ground. But the donkey is a beast of burden, and not food, and as such was slain in such a way as to leave the body apparently perfect, so that it might perform the deity's work in the abode of the entities. Naturally, the throat would not be cut, because it was not a sacrificial feast. From this, the dedication is clear. If the beast is not ceremonially slaughtered and cooked, it will not be a sacrificial meal. Conversely, all offerings that are slain with a knife and burnt represent the communal feast, just as the divine effigy was anointed after the manner pleasing to itching man. So were the appetites of the entity satisfied. He intermarried with the tribe and fed at the same table off the same food. Hence the lamb, which is substituted in so-called more civilized times for the firstborn and offered at the common table, represents the more primitive cannibal sacrifice. Some cultures actually cannibalize those who just die. I think that's the most common thing, right? Or they cannibalize the executed, or the people that are fought in war. Even some of the modern voodoo ceremonies, the blood of the surrogate is daubed on the child, in which we may see an attempt to perpetuate a very common religious fraud. The so-called deity is deceived by the blood-stained appearance of the child, and at the same time, he feeds on the carcass of the victim, which sounds a lot like the Christian mythology. A lot of them talk about, I'm covered in the blood of Jesus, God will accept me. It's like, why? Maybe God's going to find you stinky and disgust, or there's a reason why some cultures refer to blood as keep away from, not as impure, but keep away from. The soul of man, which is inseparably connected with the blood, does not descend to Sheol unless the body is buried. Hence, presumably, while the body of the donkey remains above ground, the shade doubtless served the tribal entity. On the other hand, slaves who accompanied their dead human lords to the netherworld are buried with them. However, we do not know what became of the carcass of the donkey in primitive times. Well, if they find it buried, there are cultures where you find buried horses and stuff like this, but if it wasn't buried in the temple or something, then how are you supposed to tell the difference between one donkey burial and another? There seems to be little difficulty in eliminating the first theory of prophylactic atonement. Every firstborn of man or beast is held to belong to the entities. Nay more, the firstborn of a sacred totem beast of sacred totem beasts are divine property for sacrifice. Now, it is extremely improbable that a savage who owns large possessions in herds and wives will sacrifice not only a lamb or a kid from every fertile female in his flock, but even his own firstborn to save himself from harm. This would, in the case of a rich man, entail an unlimited destruction of property to obtain a very problematic result. Still more, it is unlikely that he will be allowed to kill the firstborn of the totem merely to preserve his individual life. Totems may be killed and eaten at solemn tribal meetings, but not by unlicensed units. Moreover, prophylactic atonement of this kind approaches the nature of the atonement for taboo or sin offering, such as has been described in the preceding chapter. The spirit causing mischief changes its human abode for the animal into which it is driven after leaving the man's body. But this, as we have seen, makes the animal really unclean, taboo, and uneatable, because it is filled with the spirit. So if we return to our argument of the rich savage, such a slaughter of scores or hundreds of firstborn represents a corresponding waste, which is absurd. The second possibility, that of possession by reason of paternity, is unlikely, although it be granted that the rights of a tribal entity or entities are recognized among the harem, and that totemism and animal-shaped entities give color to a belief in intermixture between gods and beasts at a period of ignorance. The argument against such a hypothesis is clear.